Welcome to FitBody Lifestyle, the show where we dive deep into the world of fitness, health, business, relationships, and the art of living a balanced life. I'm Jami.
And I'm Greg, and we're here to give you the benefit of our experiences in the fitness and bodybuilding industry, the corporate world, running a business, personal development, and building healthy relationships.
Whether you're sweating it out in the gym, hustling in your business, or seeking balance in your everyday life, you're in the right place.
So lace up those sneakers and grab that water bottle, and let's get ready to transform our minds, our bodies, and our lives.
Welcome back to another episode of our FitBody Lifestyle podcast, and we're really excited to be back here with you today, and we have some great topics. We're going to talk first about managing burnout, and I'm here with my handsome husband to talk a little bit about a subject that I think we both have a lot of experience with. So I think talking a little bit about what might be causing it, what are some potential opportunities for decreasing burnout or managing it a bit better is really what we want to explore today.
Yeah, and let's set the table a little bit with this. So when we're talking about burnout, we're not just talking about burnout at the stage. We're talking about burnout in life. We definitely have experienced that. We've experienced burnout in the corporate world, and burnout is burnout. And essentially, a lot of what I think we want to talk about today is a little bit more directed to the stage, but and competitions, but it's also applicable in life. And as you guys know, what we always say is that bodybuilding is not life, but bodybuilding can make your life better. So where do you want to set the table from there?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like it's more of a life thing and not so much of a stage thing. That's just one small component, or should be one small component of life if you're a competitor. I think starting with the why are you burnout is a really good place to start. I know that in some cases for myself, it's just putting too much on my plate. I know for some people, what I hear when discussing what's going on in their lives, it could be they're bored, or it's a lot of repetition. Maybe they're not putting enough time, for joy or for fun or for, other things. It's just the grind constantly. And I feel like usually burnout comes from a myriad of areas of our lives. It's usually not just one, although sometimes it can be, just depending on what the person's tolerance is.
What's the way that I say it? You're putting 12 pounds of crap into a 10-pound bag of crap, and that 2 pounds got to go somewhere. So we see this a lot in terms of, and quite frankly, let's be honest, we do this a lot. And to be very clear and full disclosure and complete transparency, this is, as we're talking about this stuff, this is much a thing for us. This is not a do as I say, not as I do. This is hey, we're telling ourselves the same things every day. So we fall into that burnout trap. We fall into how much more can I put on my plate? And there's an allure to that. There's an allure to that based on your interest and based on, things that you're passionate about. And, one of the things I struggle with is that there is the monotony of the day, and then there's things that I want to do. And this is something that we've had, exchanges about, and we're working through together, is that, Jami's a person who gets up and just starts right away in her daily tasks, and she's very focused and very, regimented in that. And I start my day and I'm a little bit more, free-spirited. So I have a little bit less structure in my day. And as a consequence, a lot of times I will get behind. A lot of times, maybe every time I get behind, because I'm sprinkling in things that I want to do during the day, but it's detracting me from the things that I need to get done.
It's great that you talked about that, because we're all different. What works for one person doesn't work for everyone. And I know for myself, the reason I do hit the ground running like I do is for a couple different reasons. One is that I feel like my mind is sharpest first thing in the morning. So I do prioritize those things that I know are really, really important. So if I have athletes that are competing that weekend, I want to make sure I'm taking a look at them first thing in the morning and getting back to them so they know if I have any changes to their plans. And then I like to go in and get back to my other athletes as quickly as I can. And then for myself in that, I know that I start to feel burnout if I'm working late in the evening, because the way my energy levels work usually, and I mean, honestly, this is how we should work. We've talked about cortisol levels are highest in the morning, and that's where we should have the most energy. And then as the day progresses is when we start to kind of wind down. So as much as possible, I like to stick with that rhythm. So if I'm still working and it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, I start to feel a little resentful and burned out, quite honestly. So with that in mind, I really do my best to focus early in the day on those tasks that I know that I'm going to want to have done, so that in the evening, I can unwind and feel like a human.
So like a circadian rhythm for sleep, you have a workadian rhythm.
Absolutely.
I just made up a word, workadian rhythm. I don't know.
Workadian rhythm. Well, and I mean,
and then we need to have a funadium rhythm too, I guess.
right.
Too. Yeah.
And just, I think one of the things that we see a lot with our clients is that, right now we're at a point in our lives where our kids are up and out. So, we do not have, those duties, those evening duties, which I know for a lot of people that do have young kids at home, that's a whole nother thing that, they don't get a chance after the work is complete or after whatever their daily tasks are done, because the kids need to be read to and played with and tucked in. And so there's, kind of not a whole lot of a break for those people. So, I think that when the kids were younger, I definitely experienced burnout in a different sort of way, maybe even more intense sort of way, because there's no off switch to the kids.
Yeah. And for many of our athletes, I think most of our athletes, competing is not a full-time job. And yet it is a full-time job because it is all encompassing. I mean, when you think about the time dedicated towards meal prep, towards gym time, towards body work, all the things that go into a successful athlete. But many of these athletes have full-time jobs. And, we've had a couple on the show. I'm thinking of Eureka and Rihanna, who have just been on the show recently and have talked about that balance. But burnouts, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. And maybe the next thing we could talk about is why are you burned out? I think that's a really good place to start, with the introspection of why am I burned out? And maybe that starts with making a list of the things that you do during the day, and breaking that down to figure out, well, what are my priorities? And at the end of the day, spoiler alert, a lot of this is going to get down to, hey, what are your priorities? And are you enforcing those priorities? And are you really making your priorities a priority? As the old saying goes, if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. So I think you maybe have heard me talk about front side focus, and you can only focus on one thing at a time. So are you really focused on that front side in those things? But here's where I thought we could go next is, if you're okay with that, is what are some of the symptoms that you look for in terms of, are you burned out?
I think that's a great place to go next. And I would say, there's a lot of things, and I think people experience this in different ways. Starting to feel resentful towards the tasks or the people around you, because you feel like you're being pulled and spread so thin. Being less effective at the tasks, maybe rushing through them or not giving 100% to them, feeling maybe a little bit lethargic and lack of energy, maybe sleep disturbances. It could be a myriad of different things, some depression, but it's just kind of that overall sense of not being okay, not being your best, and this is different than having a bad day. We all wake up on the wrong side of the bed and have a bad day sometimes, but we're talking about when it's consistent. It's something that's nagging at you over a long period of time where you feel like, I need to address this.
Yeah. And I, as you were talking about those things, all of which are accurate, it brought me back to just some military background, so one of the things that we always would look for burnout in soldiers was self-care. Was their self-care failing? Meaning, were they not shaving? Were they not, back in my day, polishing their boots? Was their uniform unkempt? What was? And there's a reason in the military, at large at least, why there's an emphasis on decorum, why there's an emphasis on appearance, and why those things matter. And part of it is they provide a good barometer for how somebody is doing. And so if you saw somebody's self-care failing or faltering, that could be a very good indication of burnout. It could be an indication of other things, depression or something else. But depression could be as you talked about, a symptom of that burnout.
Definitely. You know, I've experienced exactly what you're describing myself. You know, and that's where that lack of motivation, it's kind of like the energy is just sucked right out of you. And so doing simple things like grooming or kind of going that extra mile to, you know, put yourself together, or even little things. If you're somebody that makes your bed every morning,
Yeah.
maybe you stop making your bed, or you stop, you know, putting the dishes in the dishwasher, you know, before you go to bed. Or, I mean, it could just be little things, you know, it just the little things, those start to compound. And then that adds to the burnout and that feeling of, you know, always being behind and not being able to catch up, and just kind of like that sense of, you know, from a physical standpoint, like if I'm running and wanting to catch my breath, to me, that's how I would describe burnout in life, is that feeling of I just can't seem to catch my breath. I'm just spinning out of control
Right.
is what I would say I experience it as.
So let me take this not a different direction, but just related direction. So and a lot of times when we talk about what we're going to talk about on the show, we focus on what we experienced the past week. You know, things that athletes have told us, their journeys and what they're going through, what we're seeing from our perspective. And what was making me think about that is that I think there's a difference. Well, is there a difference? I don't know. I don't know that I don't know what my opinion is on this. So let's ask the question. Is there a difference between burnout and being overwhelmed by a situation that is present in your life? For example, a breakup, or a loss of a job, or loss of a loved one, something like that just makes you feel overwhelmed with whatever you already have going on.
Well, I mean, I do think there's a difference in an isolated incident and something that's chronic. So certainly those isolated incidents that you're describing could contribute to burnout if you're already on the brink, and then you have something like that happen. Certainly it could push you to that next level of approaching that chronic burnout. I would say if things are going great and you're in the flow and there's a hiccup somewhere along the way, you deal with it, move on. I wouldn't consider that burnout. It might not feel really great. And that's why I said, I mean, you might not have a great day. I mean, it's not about everything always being hunky-dory. And, we have to be realistic. Life is going to throw us challenges. But when we're talking about burnout, in my mind, we're talking about something that's chronic, something that's going on for a long period of time, that's really kind of sucking the life out of you and making you not want to continue.
But I agree with you 100%, and I love those points, and I think the one thing I would sprinkle on top of it is that an event, if you are burned out and not maybe aware that you're burned out, and an event occurs in your life that's outside of that, one of those life events, and life always has a way of reaching up and slapping you just when you think you got everything going on. But if you're in that burnout phase and you are not aware of it, you're just not paying attention to it, you're just keeping your head down, going through the work, and then something hits you that overwhelms you, part of being overwhelmed by that event could be that you're burned out. And you just don't have the mental capacity or emotional capacity to deal with that event in a positive way. And trust me, I'm not saying that that's in every circumstance. I'm just saying that those events, when they happen, and as we talked about, they're always going to happen. Life is always going to happen in some way, shape, or form. When you overreact, or when your reaction to that event is so extreme, is that an indication that you might be burned out anyway?
I definitely think that is the case. And one of my first points that I wanted to bring up as we approach how do I deal with it is, to me, number one is I feel like we should always be checking in with ourselves. And certainly when something, in life reaches up and smacks us across the face, it forces us to do that. It forces us into some introspection. And one of the things that I want to recommend is that we don't wait till that point, that we're checking in with ourselves. And I know we talk a lot about journaling and some of these other types of things. These are ways of checking in with ourselves, of reframing our mindset, of making sure that we're keeping ourselves in the right kind of headspace. And I do feel like the people that I see that are most successful at managing this are people that are consistently checking in with themselves and making course corrections as needed to make sure they're not allowing themselves to get to the point of burnout. It's much easier to catch it before you get there than it is to deal with it once you're already fully there. So
an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
So that's number one. To me, number one is, checking in with ourselves, especially if you're one of those busy type A people, you're juggling a lot of different responsibilities. They could be professional, they could be personal, whether it be being a spouse, being a parent, being a girlfriend, boyfriend. All of those things. I had a client check in with me yesterday who's definitely one of these type A's, who's a professional athlete in multiple sports and traveling the world. And she's doing, bodybuilding prep with me. And then she's also a professional surfer. And one of the things she mentioned is that, her husband really wanted her to go on this mountain bike ride with her that was like 16 miles uphill. It was a lot, and her body was already so stressed. She was stressed for time. She's managing a lot of things. She's getting ready to leave the country for a competition, and she's prepping for a bodybuilding show, and it just smacked her. It really did. And one of the things that we did discuss is you've got to protect yourself when you start to realize, okay, I'm piling it on. How much more can I take before I break and everything just starts to go down the toilet? So, that's where coming back to checking in with yourself. And then, to me, the next step is making sure that you're prioritizing. What are all the priorities that you have in your life? Listing those things and then putting them in an order of most important to least important. So you make sure that that's aligned with how you're living your life and what you're doing. Because when we get out of alignment, I feel like that's when we really start feeling the burnout, because we know we're not giving attention appropriately to the things that we care about.
I was thinking about the checking in with yourself, and I think, but I have it in my mind as a question. So I'm just thinking, a question for myself is: does checking in with yourself include having a plan before you need to check in with yourself?
That's a good question. I think they're both really important. I do think that listing your priorities and having a lot of clarity around your priorities is going to help you check in, because what are you checking in about? Having that clarity. And
what made me think about this is just like knowing yourself. So to check in with yourself is part of knowing yourself, is part of being honest with yourself. And then as I'm thinking about this, okay, we know, and we would say, and we would self-profess that we are pilers on. We will pile more stuff into our day and more stuff onto our plate than what we really can accommodate on most days, quite frankly, that we do that. So knowing that we have that propensity, and you're making me think about things to improve while as we sit here. And part of what I did in the corporate world is I would always make a list of things that I wanted to do that day. And it's funny, my original list would have 10 or 12 or 13 items on them. And as I got experience doing that, I would realize that, man, if I got to 4 of them or 5 of them, I was doing really good. And so I changed my approach on that and just made a smaller list of things that I wanted to get accomplished that day. And I don't know why I've deviated from that. But as I think about, our conversations and things that you and I are dealing with together, meaning, and, in complete transparency, we're dealing with some frustration that I dilly-dally. I may not be as focused. I may not be as directed to getting certain things done. And as a consequence of that, I'm not preserving the quality time that we want to have with each other. So fair?
Well, I appreciate I appreciate that, of course. I do think, while that's fair, I also feel that I can tend to be so driven that I can go to the opposite extreme. And so lending itself to burnout, whereas you moderate yourself a little bit better. So if you need a break, you'll take a break, whereas I will not.
Yeah.
So I do think there's pros and cons to the different approaches. You and I have different approaches. And this is where, kind of going back to that listing the priorities. And then making sure that if you are doing that daily list, does it align with, those priorities and that the order of the priorities that you've made. And I love that you talked about preserving time, because I know that what can go away quickly with us is our time with each other,
Yes.
just our quality time, just, focusing on each other, because we are constantly doing and giving and, that kind of thing. So, that's one of those things where actually scheduling the time
Right.
is so important, and then sticking to that schedule, and then making sure that we're getting all the other daily responsibilities done, so there's room for that. Like we did that last night, and it was amazing. I mean, it was just like we got to spend some really good quality time together, and it helped remind us how important that is.
And the really good quality time we spent together was at a puppet show of the Princess Bride puppet show here in Phoenix, and it was pretty interesting. It
was funny.
It was funny. It was pretty interesting, and
we're just doing something
good.
silly.
It was good. Yeah, and we spent it with our daughter and her friend, and it was a wonderful time that we did preserve. And as we're talking about this, again, I want to be. I very much lean in and love the Dalai Lama's or Gandhi's notion of be the change that you want to see in the world. And so when I talk about this stuff with you, I really want to not just talk about it and say, hey, I've just talked about it, it's great. I want to live it as well. And so I'm going to thank you for helping inspire in me a little bit of a thought that had not occurred to me until this very conversation right here, right now, about making that list of what I want to get done and imposing a little bit of time restriction on it too, and saying, hey, I want to get this done by this time of day. And you're always reminding me to check the calendar for the next day, which I can be very bad about. And so check the calendar the night before. The analogy here is to macro tracking that I'm gonna connect, and you're probably wondering, well, how are you going to connect those? Well, I'll tell you, we have found that the best way to macro track is to plan the night before. So plan your day, your next day, the night before. And that same thing I think is true as I'm talking about scheduling to avoid burnout, is to go through my next day the previous night.
I love that. And my wonderful husband has a saying,
Where's he?
failing to plan is planning to fail. And you're absolutely right. I think that, when people are telling me, oh, I can't sleep and my mind's racing, a lot of times I feel like it's that feeling of being overwhelmed and that lack of clarity around how everything's going to get done. So that's where sitting down and then, kind of going a little bit further, in the line of logic that I'm talking about, where first and foremost we identify what are the priorities, and then in what order, and then from there the tasks and things like that. But then that next level is what you're talking about, is then now blocking out the time for it. Before I go to bed every night, I do review the schedule for the next day. I set alarms for myself. Those alarms might be so that I remember certain calls or certain appointments, or because it's easy to get focused and miss the time. So I set those alarms for myself. I also set alarms for myself, like when we're doing this, because I get up early, make sure I'm getting a lot of my work done, and then I have an alarm set for myself for when I need to go get ready. So that I have plenty of time to get ready. And then I have alarms set for when I need to leave the house. It just gives me a ease and a sense of I'm not worried I'm going to forget anything. And if an alarm goes off and I'm like, wait a minute, what am I supposed to be doing? It's all in my calendar. So I can easily just go, oh, okay, that was a call that I need to jump on right now. Or, okay, that's my time to go ahead and start getting ready. Whatever that situation is, it just really gives me a sense of ease. And that's helped a lot with that sense of feeling a lack of control, or some of these things that do lead up to burnout. I can put my head on the pillow at night and go to sleep knowing that the next day I already know what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, how I'm going to get everything done in a reasonable amount of time. And sometimes things get thrown off. I mean, we did have an interesting day yesterday where, there were some calls that were unexpected, and that took a lot of time. So it kind of threw everything around. So that ability to be resilient and, be able to move things around when the day does get a little bit out of whack, I think is really important too. That for me can cause some anxiety. At the same time, there's that, you also got to build in a buffer with time too and make sure. So everything got done. We still got to our puppet show. We still had a good day. But there are going to be those days, you have a plan and as what you're saying, no plan survives
no
first
plan survives
contact.
first contact. And you read my mind. I was just thinking about, and I want to, so everybody doesn't think we're going down the rabbit hole, which maybe we are a little bit, but and burnout can be a rabbit hole, but this all relates to burnout. And as we talk about planning and having a little bit of structure to your life, and I just went back and you reminded me of the quote from Dwight D. Eisenhower. Bit in preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And I think about that quote a lot because, and I experienced this both in the military and corporate life, what I'm experiencing now, and maybe not doing so well about. But as we talk through this stuff, honestly, you guys are helping me deal with my own demons. But the planning process, just taking that time to kind of sketch out your day, to remove the uncertainty where you are able. And as we talk about, again, the analogs to other things in life, control what you control. We tell that to competitors all the time. Control what you control. You can't control the judges. You can't control the other competitors, but you can control what you do. And in this sense, in the planning sense, to avoid burnout, when you are able to plan and remove some of that uncertainty around your day, then when things happen, and they always will, at least you have a plan. And so you need to have the flexibility to pivot from that plan when you need to. But that plan really does help avoid that angst, that feeling of being overwhelmed, because you're controlling the uncontrollable. You're controlling the scattershot that is your next day. Today is Thursday. Tomorrow is Friday. If Friday is that looming in the shadows of, oh my God, what's going to happen? Well, I know I got this and I got this, and if I'm just thinking that in my head, well, okay, I've kind of started the planning process, but I really haven't planned. But taking that moment, that 5 or 10 minutes to just say, okay, here's what's on my calendar, here's what I got to do. And one thing, you and I have both been in leadership positions for a while, and the one thing that I always found that I never had enough time for was probably the most important thing you do as a leader, which is to think. Just to take that moment to think and schedule that. I mean, that you can schedule that. You can schedule that, and as I'm talking about this, we have taken a step in that direction. We need to follow through. So I'm just telling you, I'm ready to follow through.
I love that. And we're talking
It's like a therapy session.
It is. We're talking a lot about the micro level, and I kind of wanted to back out to the macro level a little bit too, to talk a little bit about, when I originally talked about the priorities and the things that are important to your life, and putting those in an order and this and that, and then constantly checking in. One of the interesting things that I've seen myself do, and I'm very aware of it, so I'm constantly checking in with myself, and then I see clients doing this a lot, is piling on to the plate too many things. And it's really interesting because I'll see, for example, say I have an athlete and they're in prep, their job is very intense, and so they're working a lot of hours. They might be a parent as well, and then in the midst of all this, where they're juggling and they're barely hanging on, they'll go get a new pet. Or they'll decide to go take a course, or enroll in a course, or, they'll pile something else on that could be the tipping point of going from they're managing it, maybe, barely, to now they're in a burnout mode, and something or everything starts to suffer. So when you're in prep, one of the things that's really important is sleep. So you go get a baby animal that's now keeping you up all night. Now you're not getting sleep. Now everything your next day is affected. And I can't tell you how often this happens. And I don't know what it is about human nature, because I'm just as guilty of this as anybody I'm talking about. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think this is where, when we're making a big decision, like like getting a pet, which is a huge, and that's just an example, but I think it's a really good way to look at it. How is this going to affect all those priorities I have in my life? And is this the right time to do that? So that's kind of that constantly checking in on yourself, like how much more can I handle? Because it's so interesting when I have people, they're like, it's too much, it's too much, it's too much. But then they keep piling on and I'm thinking, well, why do you keep adding when you're already telling me it's too much, And
I think it's the belief that there's a magic pill or there's a solution in something else that I'm doing rather than focusing on the problem that I currently have. And I mean, we've talked about this before. People who the pet is a great
example,
story. And the other thing that we've seen people do is people that are having marital difficulties. Okay, well, let's have a kid. Because once we have that kid, that will solve all of our medical problem or our marital problems. And it's that belief, I think, and it's a lie that to ourselves that if I just do that, finding the solution in an affirmative action rather than in focusing on your prioritization of your existing load.
Right. I mean, and I do think that some of us, and again, I mean, I'm talking, about myself in many cases in the past. I mean, there's times where I felt like if I wasn't busy, that I didn't have value, or if I wasn't busy enough, I wasn't contributing enough. There's kind of like those stories that I've told myself in the past, and I hear this from clients and athletes and things like that I've worked with, that there's that sense of self-worth and value that comes from being busy.
From doing more, from the belief you're doing more.
Right. That can then drive us into burnout because it's like more, and that unwillingness to just step back and have the quiet time and calm the mind and take some time for yourself, or not feeling you deserve it. You know what I mean? And that's where kind of digging into that root of, and I mean, as you know, I hired a performance coach. I don't know, it was probably 8 months ago or something like that. And the reason I did it is because I started feeling some burnout and I started recognizing some of the things I'm talking about, which is one of the reasons I loved this subject for today. And I wanted somebody who was going to shoot really straight with me and give me a good dose of reality in terms of why are you doing this to yourself? And then, digging into that so that then I can start to undo some of the old tapes. For me, one of the things, my dad, growing up, he was always very successful. And I looked at that and I admired him so much. And I felt this pressure, the pressure I put on myself. Not that he put on me, I felt like I had these big shoes to fill. And so, I went on this journey of, whether it be through my education, through my work life, through my home life to, be able to measure up to what, how I perceived him to be. And so I do see now as an adult that I've got to unwind some of those tapes and rework some of my thinking patterns around that so that I can also, enjoy life and focus in on the things that really matter to me. It's not about pleasing everybody all the time. It's about, taking care of the things that are really important to me that I love and I'm passionate about.
And since we're in full disclosure here or talking about how we got to this point of burnout, the thing that always drove it for me was that growing up, I was not a popular kid, and I was not in the popular cliques and everything. So there was a lot of time spent looking for others for my validation. That need for external validation was a driver in me, and that's something honestly that I've been able to identify as we've been talking with our performance coach. And Sam, if you're listening, we can't wait to get you on the show, which we're excited about. And that external validation, and oh, by the way, I'm still struggling with that. And I see it all the time in our industry as well, as that looking at others to validate what you're doing. And for me, I look at others and what they are doing and think, oh my God, I should be doing that. And that leads to this more mindset, more is better. And it's a lie to myself. And so my own work right now is really focused on internally validating that mindset or that feeling that I'm enough. And we get that a lot. I mean, we see that I'm not enough a lot in this industry. I saw it a lot in the corporate world as well. And so my not enough, not being enough, is that I look to others for that validation. And in the process of doing that, I also look at what they're doing and think, well, I need to do that. Maybe that's the whole pet. Maybe that's related to the whole pet thing, that same kind of mindset. But a lot of what we're talking about really gets me thinking about. I love movies, which you know. And one of my favorite movies is The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. And there's a scene in that movie where he is practicing to be a samurai, and he's practicing his swordsmanship, and he keeps going against this guy, and he keeps losing, and people are betting on him and everything. And some guy comes out to him at some point during this process, and he says, "Too many minds. You are paying it." And I'm not going to quote the language very well, but basically saying you're focusing on your opponent, you're focusing on the crowd, you're focusing on this, you're focusing on that. Too many minds, and one mind, just one mind. And when you think about that one mind thing, I mean, think about the power of just being singularly focused, about being focused on that one thing and getting it done well and to your own satisfaction, how good that makes you feel. I know it does for me. And so as we have this conversation, I just have to tell you, I was joking. I'm not joking that this was a little bit of a therapy session for me, because I had some insights and aha moments during this.
Yeah, I love that you talked about the external validation, because I feel like it's always, I agree. I mean, that's something that I've had challenges with as well. And we're living in a day and time where we have everybody's best put out into the world. So there's a perception that, and I hear this from people all the time, oh, so-and-so is doing this, should I do that? Or so-and-so is juggling all these things and doing something, but you don't really know what that person's really going through. And so, it's social media that's painting the picture that, everything's perfect and wonderful. And I love that we're able to be vulnerable here in talking about this and talking about our own challenges. And it's like we talk about with balance. You're never balanced. You're always balancing. And right. I feel like when we talk about something like burnout, it's not a one time, am I not? It's that constant checking in. Is my plate too full? Am I starting to load too much on myself? Am I starting to lose the joy in what I'm doing? I feel like this is something for me personally that is truly a constant thing. And it's something I talk to you about really frequently.
You do. And which I appreciate.
And it's just an awareness that I have to be careful, because, I'm one person. And, when I start pushing myself to take on too many things or saying yes, sometimes we have to learn to say no. And, when we want that external validation, which we always do, all of us do, committing to too many things, to too many people. I mean, I do know that one of the things I'm aware of is if I overcommit, then I underdeliver, and I don't ever want to sell somebody short. So it is something I'm constantly checking in with myself. Is this something I can take on and do well and give my full self to it? And if not, I want to be honest with the person asking me for whatever it is and say, listen, a lot of times people say, well, why aren't you taking on clients? Things like that, for example. Once I get to a certain point and I start feeling like, okay, I'm pushing it, I will not take somebody on, because that's not fair to them either, to not be able to give my full self, So it really, and it ebbs and flows, and I have to consistently be making those shifts in my, in my awareness and in my own life to make sure that I'm not zapping the joy out of what I'm doing or selling somebody short because I'm overwhelmed.
And as we talk about that, I have a similar issue, but a little bit different in the sense that, we've talked about that. This is that I will invest so much in one person, because that one person is so important to me, which I don't regret, but I may be investing so much in that one person that I make other people around me that also deserve my attention or my response are suffering as a result of that. And so it's again, as you say, it's balance. And the metaphor that came to mind here is that if you consider life walking across a giant cavern, and when you start walking and before you're burned out, you're walking on a plank that's 6 feet wide, and and it's very easy to do that. There's no real balancing involved. Certainly if you go too far to the right or too far to the left, you're going to fall off, but you're okay. But now as you pile stuff on, you take that 6-foot plank and you start to narrow it, and then suddenly it's a 2x4 and you're walking across a 2x4. And how many of you I don't want to walk across that cavern on a 2x4. And then sometimes when you even pile more on your plate, you're cutting that 2x4, and then it becomes a tightrope. And then the tightrope becomes a piece of dental floss. And you're walking across this cavern on a dental floss. And you think about all the other things, and first you're walking and you have one of those balance bars, and then you take that away because you piled so much on your plate that you can't handle that balance bar anymore. Because you're trying to juggle dishes as you're walking across this cavern, and that metaphor, as I describe it, is really not so much of a metaphor. It kind of feels like life sometimes.
Yeah, I love how you're describing this because I'm feeling it. It's like the anxiety of the next step.
Yes.
The fear. That.
Well, what if I get a crosswind? And what if I get this? And oh my God, what if anyway? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good. I mean, that is exactly what it feels like. That's what getting to that point of burnout feels like. And, at that point, what can you do? I mean, to me, there's two things. One, start taking some things off your plate. Start deciding where my priorities are going to be. And that might mean disappointing some people, and that's okay. I think communicating and being as honest and upfront as you possibly can helps to smooth that over a bit. And, I don't think there's a person in the world that can't identify with, feeling overwhelmed or, to the point where they're getting to the point close to burnout or to burnout. So I think a lot of times it's just a communication of, hey, I know I set out, I committed to this. And, once I took a look at all the responsibilities I have on my plate, this is more than I can handle effectively. So, I mean, that's one thing. The other big thing that I've seen a lot of our most effective coaches do is setting boundaries and communicating the boundaries, because when you have no boundaries, then it's not that people are bad or don't care about you, but they don't know. They don't know what you need from them or what you expect from them. So, when you're in a case like that and, everyone's pulling you every different direction and you're not giving any kind of guidance as to what you need or what you're willing to do or what you have availability for, then there's no way you're going to feel in control, relaxed, able to apply yourself in the best way possible.
Yeah, it's so fun. Sometimes the way we think alike is scary, because before you got to the B word, boundary word, I was thinking about setting boundaries, and something that we talk about. And one of the books that I know one of several of our coaches have read, and I have read, is Set Boundaries, Find Peace. And one of the things that I think as we talk about boundaries that you and I constantly reinforce is that boundaries are only as good as your willingness to enforce them. So if you say that I have a boundary of I'm not going to respond to emails after 9:00, okay, for example, and that's a boundary. And then you get that email at 9:01. And you say, well, it's 9:01, my boundary is 9:00, so I'm going to go ahead and respond to that boundary. Well, that's fine, but you've also now trained the people that have emailed you that you will not enforce that boundary.
And you set an expectation now
right.
going
and you
forward.
set an expectation. So remember that boundaries are good, but your willingness to enforce the boundary is really the key component of that. And one other thing I would say is enforce your boundaries with a little bit of compassion, because people don't know that we've seen some people enforce their boundaries in a fairly negative manner. And while I respect their desire to respect their boundaries, there's a way to do it that I think implies and empowers people more with the fact that, look, I want to take care of you. To take care of you, I need to take care of me. And so my boundary is that I don't respond to emails after this particular time. And I hope you understand that. And there's a way to do it compassionately, I think.
I agree. And what came to my mind is, we have a check-in time that we ask our athletes to have their check-ins by noon, so that way we can respond in a reasonable amount of time. Every day is a little bit different for us. And so I do my best to, respond to things as early as possible in the day. Yesterday, like I mentioned, we had a lot of extra calls and just some things that were unexpected, ended up pushing, some of my check-ins into a bit later in the day. And then sometimes what'll happen is then people start messaging me to see when I'm going to message them back. And we have a 24-hour response time. Of course, we never take 24 hours to respond. It's just there's that expectation because I do usually respond so early. So then now I have extra messages to respond to explain why I'm not responding yet when it's like only a few hours past when I normally would respond. So,
Right.
It's one of those things where it's, that communication. And I did this yesterday. I had somebody, do that. And first of all, when they do that, it kicks them to the end of into the queue. And I just let her know that. I said, hey, I'm always going to respond to you same day. You don't have to worry. I'll let you know if I didn't receive your message on time, because sometimes people forget to hit send or something. There's other things that can happen. So I always like to send a reminder if I haven't gotten it. And sometimes people are like, oh, I just didn't, it didn't send. Here it is. And that way I set that boundary, but helping her to understand why she may not have heard back, in the same amount of time and why, she can relax and not worry that she will hear from me that day, that kind of thing. So I think that's what you're referring to is, rather than, just jumping right on the person and assuming that they're, that benefit of the doubt thing we always like to talk about, assuming that they're just being, selfish or pushy or whatever, just knowing that, that person's just coming from a place of curiosity or that person's coming from a place of wanting to make sure that, that I got what they sent to me, that kind of thing. And I was able to then, let her know, what the expectation could be going forward. And that way, rather than me getting frustrated because I'm getting these extra messages when I'm doing my best to get back to everybody, I'm able to then manage that better.
I think as I think about that situation they describe, and we're talking about how to do it with compassion, I'll give you just this example. Okay, somebody emails me and it's after my boundary time and they say the next day, hey, did you get my email?
I didn't know you had boundary times.
well, that's part of my therapy today. Okay. And I just got to figure out what those are, but that was good, babe. That if somebody sends me an email at 9:30 and I don't respond and they ask me the next day, hey, did you get my email? And I said, there's two ways I can respond. Yes, I did. I don't respond to emails after 9. Boom. That's it. That's all I say. Well, that's not very compassionate. But if I say, yes, I did, and I appreciate you sending it, and just so you know, I have set this boundary for myself that I don't want to respond, and here's the reason why. And just give somebody a little context to that. Of I need to protect my space, and that's my time when, that I've dedicated to my family or to, my meditation or whatever it is that caused you to set that boundary. Give the person the benefit of the doubt and just explain that to them. It's not going to kill you to do that. And the more they understand that about you, hey, you may actually inspire them to enforce or do their own boundaries.
Well, that one of the other interesting things about boundaries that I do tell a lot of our coaches, because I feel like just about every coach that we've ever brought on after a period of time will come to us with this question.
Yes.
How do I manage the expectations of the clients? Because maybe the client is, messaging every day instead of just on their check-in day. And we like to be flexible with people if they need something, but also we have to set some boundaries because it can become, a little bit too much.
Yeah,
and if it's questions that could wait till check-in day, then, it's okay to have them, hold those questions and write them down, give them some kind of guidance. And what I've told the coaches, and I think what everybody's learned through the trial and error and tribulations, is that when you do set boundaries, the people that you set boundaries with typically will value your time and what you're doing for them more versus not having any boundaries, and people just kind of running amok, over everything, or kind of just being more lackadaisical with it. The more that you really hold people to a standard, the more that, it can even put them at ease because they know specifically what's expected of them, when it's expected of them. A lot of times I feel like that actually can be comforting to people. So where some people are afraid to set boundaries, you're not just doing it for yourself. It's actually going to benefit the other person as well. So it's just a matter of, it can be hard at first because especially if you're a people pleaser, and it can be hard to tell somebody no, or there is this parameter or this boundary I need you to respect. The thing I wanted to express and help people know is like, start small and then start building up and practicing. And I do believe, and what I've seen consistently is once you really get comfortable setting those boundaries, everybody benefits and appreciates it.
A rising tide floats all boats, or what is it? A rising tide, whatever. I can't remember the metaphor, but we're out of time. So let's kind of circle back to this and just kind of hit those main points. And I think the first point that we talked about was know your personality, and do you have that predisposition towards being
type A.
a piler on. Yeah. Most type A's know that they're type A's. So if you know you're a type A, then know yourself, the first part. The second thing that you said about was check in with yourself, and do those frequent check-ins. And I think when you say check in with yourself daily, yes?
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, I would say at least once a week, but I think checking in with yourself daily is smart.
The third thing we talked about was prioritizing and making sure that, look, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, you've got to be willing to make those decisions and say, hey, look, today, the most important thing that I do is spend time with my wife. Or today, the most important thing that I do is spend time with my daughter. Or today, the most important thing that I do is take a bath. I mean, whatever it is but you need to make sure you're dialing in those priorities, and then that kind of goes in with prioritizing, or not prioritizing, but setting those boundaries as well. We talked about planning and scheduling, and just taking that moment that night before to plan out your next day. And we talked the last thing about setting boundaries and and on top of that, you talked about setting expectations. And by setting expectations, it's both of yourself, but of the people that the boundaries may impact.
Right. And the one thing that you didn't mention that I think is really important is taking things off your plate. Once you start getting to that point of starting to feel overwhelmed, or even before that, really evaluate as you start to commit to certain tasks or certain things we talked about, like getting a new pet. Like anytime you're thinking about committing to something, how does this fit into the overall scheme of what I'm doing? Do I have the time and the width to be able to accommodate whatever that is? And is it aligned with my values and my goals?
So I think that takes us full circle with the Burnout show. And I think this is a topic we need to come back to at some point.
Oh, I'm sure we will.
Just kind of talk about a few things. I'm curious about the comments. And yes, that was a shameless plug for like, subscribe, and comment so we can know what's on your mind.
And give us a review.
And give us a review. That would be fantastic. And everybody remember the 3 B's. Be good to yourself, be good to each other, and be safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to FitBody Lifestyle. We hope today's episode has left you feeling motivated and equipped to tackle your fitness goals, business challenges, and the daily dance of life. Remember to value progress over perfection. Life's tough enough alone. Find the chosen family around you to help you along the way.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at FitBodyFusion.